Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Business Barbershop Podcast. I am Chris.
I'm Keane.
And I am Andrew.
And we are live in studio. Not really a studio. We're just in my conference room, but
Studio for us.
kind of like a studio. We have microphones and wires and things of that nature. So
Feels like a studio.
I feel important today. But we are back. This is we're going to do at least one thing today, which is follow up with part 2 of Keane's plan for financial freedom. And we'll probably recap that first just a little bit in case you missed episode 1, and then dive in. We've got Andrew here who, knows a thing or two about financial freedom. And then who knows what we're going to talk about. But might as well dive in. So Keane, why don't you real quick just give us the Reader's Digest version of, I think we did steps 1, 2, and 3.
1, 2.
1 and 2 of 4 steps.
There's only 3 steps.
That's what I thought. Okay.
With an extra step.
That's right.
Of phase 4.
Right.
Right.
So quick recap. Step 1, step 2, and then we'll dive into step 3.
Yeah. The first phase is really just acquiring your rental portfolio to begin with. This is using your BRRRR strategy. There obviously is many different methods that people have done BRRRR rentals. If you've forgotten what a BRRRR is, it's a buy, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat. The concept of it is that the refinance part gives you your cash back. The drawback is that in today's market, what they call 100% BRRRR, where you get 100% of your capital back, does not cash flow in these high value markets like Seattle, right? You can still do them like Dayton, Ohio, right? You're looking at buying a duplex at basically almost anywhere that meets the 1% rule.
Yes.
If you found a distressed property that you could buy, renovate, and get the cash out where the 70% loan to value of the cash out equals your purchase price in rehab, you get all of your money back. But you're gonna be limited to certain markets where price points are lower.
Yes.
My strategy is to do it in a high value market because you can't managing, if you did it on like a Dayton, Ohio duplex that was $180,000, maybe you're buying a place for like $80,000, $90,000 beat up, spending $30,000, $40,000 renovating it, and then you're at 70% loan to value at your 120, 130-ish, and then you're cashing out to that number. And if you did that 10 times, you would only have $500,000 in equity.
Yep.
And so my strategy allows you to have this, which is one of the issues we have with real estate investing, which is true for a lot of it. A lot of things can get an amazing rate of return at a lower market cap, right?
Correct.
At a lower price point.
Yes.
Like Gary Vaynerchuk's go to garage sales and buy collectibles and sell them on eBay. Huge rates of return.
It's what I do because I'm lazy. So
Yeah.
I don't do any of the BRRRR part. I just buy and rent.
Yeah.
But I just find the markets where the rent
It's really high.
meets that 1% rule, so cash flow is super easy.
Right.
Catch a little bit of depreciation. Those kind of stack over time. I don't front load it.
Right.
And it works. It's fine.
Right.
It's a nice place to just park some cash. It just kind of does its thing. Give you some cash that you usually depreciate out, so you're not paying any income tax on that. And it's fine.
I think a good thing to notate that is one of the reasons why this strategy I'm doing has, and I've picked up a lot of clients that want to do this, which is why it's become majority of my work I do, is because there's a lot of people who have found a way to have a job that they enjoy some aspects of it. It does pay very well, but there's a lot of aspects to the job they don't like. And the idea of doing it forever the way that they're doing it is not comforting.
Yeah.
So they're looking for a way to give themselves some, financial freedom while also getting them a boost in their net income, because of tax shelter. I think one of the reasons why I was thinking about it, I was thinking, why would someone like Chris not care as much about doing this? And you know what it is I thought about? When people feel like they have the freedom to work the way they want to, then they're not dying to try to have a financial plan that's going to allow them to retire from those aspects of their work. And I think you've already been doing that. I think you basically said, I'm not going to work in a way that I'm starving to get to a financial freedom retirement. And so if I'm playing the slow game, then who cares, right? Because you're already operating in that space that they probably want to get to, which is like, for instance, as a mortgage banker, our job gets commoditized pretty heavily. I like the work. I like the specialty work I do and so forth. But when did I ever feel comfortable like forfeiting that part of the business where I had to, chase 100 real estate agents and then get rate shopped from everyone. It's like, well, if you want to be Walmart, and serve the huge masses, you have to deal with a bunch of people's needs, and it's really demanding.
Yeah.
And that kind of demanding is the part where I'm like, look, it's not that I don't enjoy it, but I just can't picture wanting to do that forever. And as I've transitioned more to a type of work that is one that I would want to do far into my retirement years, the less I care about that timeline, showing up, right? And so I just imagine you've already been doing that, on a pretty high level already.
Yeah, I have. It's also, you have to remember, like, it's really important to kind of stay in your lane. I'm not a real estate investor. Mm-hmm. That's not what I do.
Right.
I own and run and grow service-based businesses.
Yeah.
That's what I do really well.
Yeah.
So my rate of return on my businesses are great.
Right.
They're not as big as yours necessarily, but over time they get super big. Mm-hmm. So like that's where I put my attention.
It's also a consideration as a percentage of risk capital. The rate of returns are exceptional in service-based businesses because there's not, hundreds of thousands of dollars out of pocket up front usually, depending on the business.
For sure.
Where I would imagine a lot of people feel like real estate is capital prohibitive, right? So if they don't have enough money to get into the game, then it can deter a lot of people from even starting.
Yeah. The hack part that I just, can reemphasize why I think this is such a solid method of investing is because if you do it right, your capital does get repurposed, and it makes the things that you could be doing, like run a bunch of service-based businesses or be a W-2 mortgage banker or a licensed certified financial planner, right? If there's a large taxable income aspect of your job, it's a method of investing that has, this tax shelter that helps improve your net income of those businesses. And so you get the repurposed capital to build up to whatever size you want. You get the leverage growth afterwards, and then you get while you're letting it season on its leverage growth, it's giving you shelters not just against the cash flow you make on those properties, but also against your regular income if you follow the whole plan, which of course requires a lot of the things that we're talking about. Which, if it's outside of people's lanes of what they're willing to do, then I get it, and I give people the precursor is that you don't.
Yeah, here's what it requires: you have to find a property that meets the criteria.
Yes.
Then you have to do the rehab.
Yeah.
Then you have to, and when this will sort of close the loop on this on the other part of yours. Then you have to subdivide and condo and flip one or two of these new things that you've built.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Then you get to rent it out, and then you get to refinance it.
Yeah.
So like that's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
It's a ton of work. Mm-hmm. I just don't want to do that work.
Yeah.
I'd rather spend this work over here. Like I calculated my. Like the return on my ad spend for my law firm is like 25 or 30 to 1.
Yeah.
So, like, that's a good return. You put $1 in, and you take 30 out, and I already know that space. So I'm just going to keep doing that over and over and over and over again.
Right.
So it is a where, and we'll maybe.
Which I was just say, I was on that track with mine, but the thing
you kind of were, except there's one big difference.
Okay.
I can just go wherever I want, and the phone keeps ringing, and the people keep signing up.
Yeah, and
everything keeps going.
That's
on.
very hard to build a mortgage business that way.
Correct. I agree.
Yeah, you have to get yourself. I mean, basically, you have to either be the owner, or you have to get yourself into some kind of management role where you're relying on overrides from branches and other whatever.
Yeah.
And when we talk about things that we like to do and what we don't like to do, what I learned is I love supporting good, smart loan officers who we think alike, but most of them don't think like I do. So I really struggled with that. But
what you really love to do, that's real talk. You like to talk about this. You could talk about this shit like all day, every day.
Yeah.
It's annoying and it's boring sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this is why you're sort of...
I'm in my space.
Yeah, you're in your space both from a practitioner standpoint and from sort of a facilitator
That's correct.
standpoint, right?
That's correct.
So if someone like me wanted to do something like this, I would just hire you or just give you some money,
right,
depending on what's sort of like going on at the time. And then you could do it for me.
Right.
Essentially.
Right.
You take some cut or whatever, however it works.
Right.
But to close the loop on step one,
Yep.
you inserted F in there.
Right. It's a flip.
Correct.
Yeah. That's how we make it work on the high value market.
That's right.
And it, as we were saying earlier too, I think that's a good precursor. If you watch an HGTV show and say, maybe I don't want to flip a house or, do it exactly how we're seeing it, but a part of that seems like fun and I would enjoy it, then it's fitting. But I warn people that it takes time, and it's something that if you don't enjoy any aspect of it, it's hard to say that you will enjoy it. Now, some people take that and translate to if it sounds like fun, but the feeling of fear supersedes the fun part. That's where I would say, like, I was there before too, and that's where I would say, you can. I'm not gonna say
it's scary the first time you do it.
It is, and you just have to you have to make sure you have good mentorship and then be willing to take that leap of faith. But that's why I always gave that reference to landlords who are super afraid of being a landlord or doing this work. But then, not that this stuff would replace what it's like to be a parent, but people jump into parenthood like it's no big deal, and it's like it's a way bigger commitment. For sure. If you can figure out how to be a parent when you haven't done it before, then this is more like committing to learn how to play golf.
Yep.
Right?
Definitely.
So you don't if you have no idea how to play golf and you're committed to learn how to play golf, that's about the commitment you should be committing yourself to.
Okay, so step one is the BRFRR method. What's
Yep.
step two?
Step two is where
So we have bought. So in our example, we bought. Step one was sort of like your first property. You buy a property. What's at least here, the characteristics of this property are it is either big enough or it is sort of arranged in such a way you have one house on it and you can put multiple units on it, and then sort of chop those up, sell
some, keep some,
kind of get some of your money back, rent the others out. That's step one, is kind of doing that with your first property.
Yep.
Right. Then what's step two?
Do you want to give that tax and investment disclaimer, by the way, before we get?
By the way, yes. As the attorney on the panel, this is not legal advice. This is also not financial advice. Don't do any of this stuff without talking to somebody, or you're a dummy. Okay? If it doesn't work out, don't call us and don't be mean to us or mad at us, because I just gave the disclaimer. So we are disclaimed officially. It's legal now. It's been happened. It's done. Okay? Yes.
Yep.
Okay. So phase two.
Yep. All right. Phase two is a mixture of a tax strategy holding process, but also helps eliminate some of the tax that's associated with the F part of the BRFRR.
Right, because when you sell, you're going to have some capital gains tax.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yep. So
it could be short term depending on what the timelines are.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. That's correct. And actually, in some cases, it's okay. Usually, the short term part is not desirable because it's usually at a higher tax rate. Yes. But it's okay if it is in this case, because that's treated as active income, and active income is what we are actively trying to use the depreciation offset. So, let's say you just got done buying a house, renovating it, and let's say you are going to sell one and keep two. So when you sell that one, there is a taxable event for that one sale. If you are committed to doing the real estate professional designation or the short-term rental loophole, which we talked about that a little bit on the last show, then there is a bonus depreciation factor where you can write off a relatively large percentage. Now, there was when the tax code first was released, I think they let you do like 100% your first year, which is nuts. But it's still, I think, at 60% now. You don't want to confirm that, but there's a portion of it you can do all up front, which is very similar to like a 179 depreciation when you have like a vehicle that's over 6,000 pound gross vehicle weight kind of a thing. Yep. Right.
But that's going down too. I think it's only 40% for this year.
Right. So it's a portion of it you can take the first year. So that's where this part of the strategy starts to come handy, because now if you did sell one right after it was developed and you claimed it as short-term capital gains, it would be taxed as income. But if you also if you are going to rent some of the units as a short-term rental and do a cost segregation study on it, or if you're designated as a real estate professional and you do a cost segregation study, that gives you that bonus depreciation that's claimed that year, which then, of course, helps offset the taxes that you would have from selling that unit.
Right.
So that you kind of manage that piece, which is, okay, we're going to sell some, keep some, maybe do some cost segs to offset some of the taxes for the sale. And the cost segregation portion, let's say it's 60%. The other 40% is still accelerated from the normal 27-year schedule based off the lifeline of the different pieces of the property.
Right.
So
Like light fixtures are like 5 years or something.
right. Furnaces 10, whatever it's going to be. So on average, it cuts down the average residential. So the residential depreciation schedule is 27 years. And on average, it cuts it down. If it's newly built, it won't be half, but it gets close to half.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the beauty of it is if you say, okay, if we are, if you are going to hold these during the depreciation schedule, then that lifeline of what's left that you'll continue to get tax sheltering on against your regular income for the time that you hold it is ideally the amount of time that you're hoping that the property will get close to doubling in value during that period of time. I know that what's the normal rate of appreciation that financial advisors put under pro forma is like 3%.
For real estate?
For
real estate?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's inflation rate plus a half a point, right? So
Yeah.
and it depends on obviously it depends on the market. But yeah, it depends. It does depend on the market,
Right.
But historically speaking, it's been whatever the inflation rate, which is typically about 2.5 to 3, and then we
Nationally.
And then we can add a half a point.
Right. I was talking to someone else about that, and
We
it said,
we know full well that the Seattle market, the LA market, the San Francisco market, New York, Chicago, right, Miami.
they carry the weight of that
Inflation
blended
rates-
rate.
Yeah, inflation rates. They carry a majority of that, right? Real estate values have not been growing at 3%.
No, and so and just certain markets that
Seattle
have just
area.
been really. I mean, it's amazing how flat some of them are. That in recessions they don't really go down, and when they have booms, they don't really tend to go up. I think that Acreage, Alaska, represented a market like that. When I looked at their numbers, it doesn't move that much.
Yeah.
And so,
have you ever like 1031 out of one of those, or is the timing really hard?
the timing on 1031s is a little tough. That's part of the back part of the strategy, right? So 1031, when you sell an asset, you have 45 days after the sale to identify up to 3 addresses, and then 6 months to close on it. There's different methods that you can do to make it a little easier. There's a thing called a reverse exchange. I've done that also. Or I should say I was processing a reverse exchange, and then the sale property I was going to sell to help with the one I was going to purchase never actually executed the sale, and so we didn't end up finishing the exchange. But I started the process of it, and but I was able to stabilize it without the sale, which was nice, and then I didn't have to sell the other one.
Yeah.
But a reverse exchange is where you buy the property you're going to exchange it to first. And it's a pretty complicated process. You need a facilitator who's an attorney who, when you close on a property, technically the attorney owns the LLC. They close in an LLC, and then you're still financially backing the whole thing. And then after you sell the other property, they complete the exchange by moving the LLC into your name, which I think basically just ends up being like a forward exchange right after they move by the process of changing who the LLC owner is within those same timelines. Is what the best way I could try to describe how I see it happening when I've read through the paperwork on it. They cost a little bit more than a regular exchange because you have to set up the LLC, and the financing is a little bit unique too because a lot of people are relying on their sale proceeds to fund the purchase. So you have to have enough liquid cash to facilitate the purchase without the sale proceeds first. And then when it comes in later on, you kind of settle how the financing happens later. So financing is a little more complicated, but I've helped enough people do it, and I planned my own where I can see all the angles. And the short version of it is that as long as you're talking, I hate to give like the super like just give me a call, but just trust me, like 99% of the people out there just don't really know. Like they'll give you some blanket answers, but they're not telling you the strategy of how to blend it. And if you're going to do a reverse exchange and it's a residential property, you probably should call someone like me who's actually who's a banker and has done it, because there's only a couple places that you could fund it, and it's not just the funding sources, but it's also the strategy. So that's where the DSTs really stand out, is that the DST is stands for Delaware Statutory Trust. From what I understand, the way I always describe it to people, and you can tell me if this is the right or wrong way to explain it, but I just understood it as a real estate investment trust, so a REIT that's been set up on a tax basis to be eligible for 1031 exchanges. Does that sound right?
It's close enough.
Yeah. I mean, it's all real estate, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes.
Yeah.
It's the old reader prospectus, but it's pretty close.
Yeah. So basically, it's products sold on Wall Street that you're investing into a handful of different kind of real estate holdings. But what makes it special is that they're eligible for a 1031 exchange, and that you'll earn somewhere between 5 to 6% cash on cash what you invest into it. Is that correct?
Yeah, and typically speaking at DST, there's one That's what makes it eligible. There's one primary property. And then when it becomes a pool of properties, that's something different. That's a 721. It comes later after the second year. So normally when you're investing in a DST, it's one project.
Got it.
Right? Not multiple projects. At least in all the ones that I've participated in. And then what can happen later, and in the retirement planning marketplace where it gets more popular, and what I've found at least is more interesting to people, is that you can do this 1031 exchange into a DST, but really what it's doing is a 721, which is after the second year of the exchange into the new property. That asset gets pooled into a much bigger multi-billion-dollar real estate pool where there's already a levelized cash flow, and so then what happens is you become a shareholder in a much bigger pool, and once you're a shareholder in that bigger pool, then there's a liquidity control because now you can sell a percentage of your shares.
Yeah, but every time you do sell it, it's taxable.
Yeah, but it's better than being forced to create this liquidity event where you have to sell everything all at once.
Yeah, don't worry, my plan has an answer for all that.
Control.
Yes.
So if you the reason I think a lot of retirees prefer the 721 option is because it makes you a shareholder within a very short period of time, a couple of years, and then you can sell a percentage of the asset over time, right?
Yeah.
And it becomes even more appealing when estate planning comes into play.
So when it becomes a 721 and you sell a portion of it, can you actually do another exchange in those portions of sales? No. Okay.
No. So it's really intended to be an end game, right? And all of the, in my experience, all the DSTs that I've done, they have a liquidity event, and then you're just doing this. Then you gotta, you're 3 years in, you're 5 years in, you're 7 years in. The shortest I've ever had a DST mature is 3 years, but you never go into one with the expectation that that's going to be the case.
You plan on 5 to 7.
You plan on an extended time horizon.
But from what I understand, you will get you'll get around a 5 to 6% cash on cash return on it.
Well,
from the get-go.
It varies.
Right.
We've had some that have been much higher, and then some have come in right around 6.
Right.
But you're really relying on either the appreciation of the asset or the cash flows, and so the cash on cash returns are all calculated at the end, and it becomes pretty clear.
Yeah.
What it is.
So, so what I've learned is that what Andrew's referring to as the capital, liquidity in the capital event happens because it's easy to identify the typical pathway for a lot of landlords.
Let's back up for a second.
Okay.
What problem are we trying to solve with step 3?
It's the exit strategy for real estate, because the whole thing is that if you are BRFRRing a high value property in the Pacific Northwest, you're probably only getting a 4 to 5% cap rate on in terms of rent relative to the value, but it is servicing the debt and it's growing. So basically, during that holding phase, the main goal of holding an asset is not cash flow. The main goal is to season the equity you created as long-term gains, to let it grow on leverage, which will turn into this huge equity position, right? Because the growth on leverage part ends up being huge, which makes real estate an attractive investment just for the standard buy and hold, right? If you're just going to do a normal buy and hold, then let's say even if it grows let's say you buy a 1% rule multifamily in Dayton, Ohio, you put exactly the minimum 25% down that's required.
Yep.
Let's say the appreciation there is a little slower, and let's say you only get 3% a year. Well, because you're on a 75% loan to value from the beginning, and you're only putting 25% down, then you're going to have a 4 times multiplier on your growth because of the leverage. So if it's growing at 3% a year and you put down 1/4 of the purchase price, then your actual, the equity growth of the appreciation relative to your investment is multiplied by a 4 times factor. And so on top of the fact that you're also paying down the principal, which also grows your equity position at whatever the amortization schedule rate is.
Yep. Okay. So let's land the plane on this one just a little bit.
Yep.
So phase 1, we started with one property.
Yep. And you just, phase 1 is really, you do the BRFRR strategy and you start doing phase 2 while repeating phase 1. So 1 and 2.
Phase 2 is just multiplying phase 1.
Yeah. Phase 2 is really well, the way I described it is phase 2 is a process of taking that reps position or short-term rental to get the tax savings, right?
But you're still doing phase 1 over and over.
Yes, you're really doing 1 and 2 simultaneously until you get to a certain portfolio size.
Okay,
right?
so like a certain net worth, but it's sort of like locked up in the real estate.
Right.
A lot of it.
So let's say I repeated the same $500,000 to acquire 10 rentals. Let's say that they all have an average value of, let's say, $800,000.
Yeah.
And we have an average leverage of $400,000. So at that point, I have used the same $500,000 to own 10 rentals. It's worth $8 million. I have $4 million worth of debt because it's all multiplied by 10.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have an equity net worth of $4 million. And it's not exactly static because obviously the first ones have been appreciating and being paid down while you acquire the second to 10th one. But it's just,
and let's say, okay, so when are you in phase 3 of Keane's plan for financial freedom?
well, 3 is like is how you plan your exit. So,
I know, but what number are you at in step 3?
So I finished designing the plan after I already got 2 more rentals than what actually meets my requirement. So,
I know, but what is the number where you're talking about phase 3?
so
I think it's changes for every person.
it's every person. It's designed for
you.
Oh.
This is your plan for financial freedom.
Yeah. Right. So I tell every client, let's design a cash flow goal. And for most people, it ends up being 5 to 10 properties. But I got to 30 before I finished designing my
at
plan.
5 to 10, you would already be doing phase 3?
You would be only doing.
You just let that thing rip for like a long time?
That's what phase 2 really is. Phase 2 is really the leverage growth and the tax savings.
Okay, but if you but if you already have 10, by the time you have 10, like why wouldn't you do 30?
Well, there's
Like, aren't you? Isn't it? It's not like
there's a couple.
it's complicated, but it's just like everything. It's not rocket science.
Yeah.
So by the time you've done it the 10th time,
Yeah.
why wouldn't you just like do it again?
Well, yeah, I can answer that question. I mean, it's not that you're not going to still do a version of the same thing.
It gets more complicated the more you have.
Yeah, managing.
Why does it get more complicated?
Well, just managing. I mean, I'm in that world now. I pay 30 mortgages a month.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, but then I know, but at some point in time, you just get a property manager to run your stuff.
Yeah, but even then, it's still
It just gets more complicated when there's more
Yeah,
projects.
and
like trying to insure them all at the same time. I mean, Keane can speak to that, but
Yeah.
that muddies the water a little bit if it gets above whatever the baseline allocation.
And remember remember we said about the market cap value limitations to real estate, right? So my portfolio basically looks like what I just described, but even larger. So it's worth about $20 million, about $10 million in debt on it. So I'm about 50% loan to value. So if I do a deal and again, I'm stacking on top of my 30 mortgages another 2 or 3, which at that point it's already getting painful. And when I was first starting and I had a net worth of $2 million and I'm doing a deal that boosts me $500,000 to $1 million, I'm ripping up my net worth in these huge multipliers. Now, pretend Warren Buffett is a fly on the wall listening to us have this conversation. And I'm talking about getting returns that far outperform what Berkshire is doing in the last 12-month cycle. The reason why he's zero interested in what we're doing is the exact same thing we just said, which is even if he gave me money to invest and I got a way better return than what Berkshire's doing, what it would do to Berkshire's stock value is so tiny because of their market cap value so big. That starts to happen to us personally, right? So if I have close to a $10 million equity position in my real estate,
right.
And so if I do a deal that makes me $300,000 richer in equity, then it's a 3% boost of my equity of my total portfolio. It's like it just doesn't do that much for me anymore as it used to. It's a really great way to build up your first 2 to 5 million that will grow on a 2, 3, 4 times multiplier on leverage to 6, 10, 15 million. So in my opinion, it is clearly the best way for people to boost their first $10 million in net worth.
Okay.
Right.
But phase 3 doesn't give you a boost.
No, it's just converting it to cash flow without having to take the tax hit.
Okay, perfect. Why wouldn't you? That sounds what you were talking about. It sounds super complicated. Why wouldn't you just like wrap those all up and just get like a personal loan on it, where the interest on the loan is sort of serviced by the cash?
Yeah, but you have to remember that we're still, there in the world of real estate investing, there's still some problems with holding the properties forever. So the depreciation eventually expires. And even though your personal rate of return on these are like infinite, because because you get your money back out, it's technically infinite, you still have to wonder whether or not the money that is in there is getting the best return relative to what it could have been if it was somewhere else, which is what in the real estate world we say is your return on equity. So there's a return on your investment. If you're doing 100% BRRRR, you're getting a 100%, you're getting an infinite rate of return on your return on investment. But as that number grows on leverage, right, there's a pretty soon that leverage growth starts to flatten out over time. And at that point, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to hold it forever. So my plan kind of answers all those things. We're going to hold it during the best parts of its leverage growth, which also is going to give us this great tax shelter, gets our income, right? When we do our cost eggs. And then when the thing has gotten close to doubling in value, we've exhausted our depreciation, and our return on equity is starting to flatten out. Now is the time to trade out of our positions.
Yeah, but can you still
Correct me if I'm wrong. Sorry to interrupt. Correct me if I'm wrong, but at 3%, that's 24-year double. So phase 2 would be about 20 years. Is the idea here?
Yeah, and the hope is that would be less than 20 years because we specifically did this in a high value market, so we didn't have to operate on those 3% projections, right? We're going to kill ourselves doing BRFRRs in Seattle because we hope to have not only a higher price point but also a better than a 3% rate of return. Nationally, it might be 3%, but we are not doing a national investment. We are doing it highly localized.
Right, but to keep the math simple, even if phase 2 was an extended time horizon, you're still looking in that 24-year time horizon at a 3% number. Now, if it's 6, obviously that number is, it's 12 years. Right?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. And most people, we have averaged well above 6% with historically low rates. And lately it's been less than 3% because of high rates. But I think that for most people, if they're going to project I tell them, look, it's up to you if you feel comfortable projecting faster than a 3% rate of inflation on that growth. But, historically it's been closer to like 11 over the last 15, 20 years. And, let's say rates, because they're going to be higher, end up being less than that. Even if it's 5 to 7, we're still talking about a 15, 20% multiplier on your return on your investment, on the equity, the initial equity, right? And so when that's growing on its leverage, you're tax sheltering it, it's growing on leverage, you're getting a little cash flow. And then, let's go back to the original scenario, 8 million in net worth, 4 million in debt. If, let's say it doubles in 15 years, okay? In 15-year timeline, at today's interest rates, you're going to pay off about a quarter of the principal balance, right? So your 4 million goes down to about 3, and then your value, of course, if it doubled, went from 8 to 16. So now you can see how that leverage growth worked for you. Even though it doubled in value, you didn't double your 4 million. Your 8 went to 16, and your debt went from 4 to 3. So you went from 4 million in equity to 13 million in equity. That's a little bit more than a 3 times multiplier, which that little extra paying to principal is, we can look at it as an extra return, but it's probably mostly just paying off some of your selling costs, right? So you just take your equity growth for what it is, and it ends up being a 3 times multiplier. Yep. And so then your equity jumps from the $4 million position to, let's say, net around 12. That's 3 times higher, right? And right when it, doubled in value, which, triples your equity position, your return on equity is starting to flatten out. Your depreciation is almost all gone, right? Perfect time to trade out of your positions, right? And so this is where a lot of real estate investors struggle with an exit strategy, because the story of most real estate investors is they don't learn about DSTs until they're old, because it's important to hear the story, because when you pick apart the plan, the most common thing I hear from people is, how come other people don't do this? And if you can't answer that question, it doesn't always give you confidence that your plan is good. I've seen it happen, so I know exactly why it happens. Most financial planners tell people don't invest in real estate. They tell them to sell their real estate and move it into market way too early, because they are asset collectors and they're paid on assets under management, right, Andrew?
Yep.
And because
that's a big part of it.
Yep. And because of that, these real estate investors look at what they're doing and they're like, I smoke your returns in the market. I would never have gotten to where I'm at if I was focusing just the stock market. Right. So I'm not listening to you. I'm going to ignore your entire industry because you guys don't know what the hell you're talking about. I did way better than you did. So then they just keep doing what they're doing, but they don't have an exit. So what they usually do is they go, well, my exit strategy is I'm going to pay these off, which is long, laborious, not efficient. And by the time the thing gets paid off, they've exhausted most of their depreciation. And all the things I just talked about earlier start to really stand out, which is there's maintenance showing up, capital expenditure starts showing up, and that starts showing up. And those are just costs of doing business, but capital expenditures and maintenance start really piling up simultaneously while their return on equity is flattening out and the depreciation is going away. And then so as soon as they pay off all these mortgages, their cash flow is great, but the interest expense for the taxes is gone. The depreciation is gone too, because it took them years to pay it all off. And they're like, I can live off the cash flow, but that was a really hard process. And then when the property starts to need repairs and work, and they're getting old, they're in their 60s and 70s and 80s, they're like, I'm just tired of this shit. is when they start looking for an option where they can sell and not pay the tax, and then they find out about the DST then.
But the DST is really just a way to defer the tax.
Not kind of, but it also gives you the cash flow because they pay.
What I'm saying is, some point in time, you're getting money and you're paying tax on it.
Yes, you're going to pay income on the dividends. But the beauty of the strategy is that when let's say after that 15-year period, you're in that position. You have 12 million that you can exit out of. So if you were to just sell it and not do an exchange, you already boosted the value 30-40% from the acquisition. Yep. Then you're letting it double in value. So you're close to 200% capital gains, and you've exhausted all of your depreciation recapture. So if you just sold it not on exchange, you're going to get crushed in taxes.
Well, you pay like 20% on that number. Right?
Well, you're going to pay, you will know, because depreciation recapture, last I looked, was 28%. And then you're going to pay whatever capital gains tax.
You're paying 20 on the true capital gains, and then you're paying. I thought it was 25, but
there's a special assessment based on income. So if you still have high income,
then it's 28.
Then you're closer to 24, and then the depreciation recapture is 28. So it's not unreasonable if you have a highly appreciated. I mean,
and we
I'm not the tax guy, right?
But we are doing this specifically for the appreciation, which is the very tax that they're going to tax you on. So
correct.
If it doubled in value like you hoped it would, and you've already and your initial value was a 30-40% boost, right? We're talking to close to 200% of true capital gains on top of all of your depreciation recapture. You're going to lose half of the asset, right?
Well, I don't know about half. But
you're going to get
maybe a third. Anyway.
But it's a lot. It's a lot.
Third, yeah.
Right.
Well, and it's in it. This is one of those. The tax on the seed or the harvest, right? So it's just more painful because you're paying, call it a third on a much bigger number.
Right.
Right. So if the gain is $10 million and you got to pay $3 million plus in tax, it's like, ooh.
And then you got to figure out how to invest that money. The beauty of the DST model is that when you do the exchange, and let's say Andrew finds you a DST that pays you 6% on what you invest. If my exit number was 12 million in boot, I get the full 6% of that 12 million bucks, right? And that's the exit number. Now my plan has been built out. Okay, so I got 12 million. You do the math, right? You got 12 million. You're gonna make 6%. That's 720,000 a year. All right, they did that math right. And so that's good. Now divide that into your monthly income, and that's your exit. So for all these people who are trying to kill themselves paying off these rentals to get their cash flow up, my argument is like, why wouldn't you just stack more? Let them grow, and then trade out of it, right? Now, technically, the best thing you could trade it out of would be something kind of like what you've been buying. It's this high cap rate. Because look at the investment on a one-on-one basis, not the full 8 million that turns into 16, but just look at one of them. So let's say it's one rental that's worth 800 grand, and it doubles in value to 1.6, and I pay down the debt to 300 grand. The perfect exchange for that particular asset would probably be another property that's almost identical in price. So instead of being a high appreciating, low cap rate investment on the West Coast, it would probably be like a multifamily in Dayton, Ohio, where for $1.6 million, I'm going to get 16 grand a month in rent, right, on the 1% rule. Then after the expenses and all that, it may net around 9. And then after the cost of leverage, because if I had a $300,000 mortgage, I'm going to get a new $300,000 mortgage on the new purchase, right? Will net probably around the same as what the DST is going to give me. It's probably going to give me around, maybe 6-7% cash on cash in terms of real rent. But I no longer am attached to a property or investment that matures 5 to 7 years. It's illiquid. I can't cash out refinance, right? So technically, that's a better product to exchange into. But imagine that you're in my shoes and you've got 30 rentals and I want to exit in 8 to 10 years. And I go through selling 30 properties over a 2-3 year cycle, 30 of them. What's the chances that every one of those 30 sales is going to land in that perfect exchange product that's going to give me a 1% rule, 8-9% true, cash on cash. And then after cost of leverage, the same 6 to 7 the DST pays. It's not likely, right? Because of the 45-day timeline to find a property and 6 months to close. So the strategy is always plan that the DST isn't even your ideal exchange product. It's just a safety net of like, when I'm ready to exit, we're going to try to find something that looks like that multifamily, and we'll find maybe up to 2 options, but I'm always making that DST my third. That way I start cycling through these, right? This is all assuming that you're going to just convert all the cash flow and ride off to the sunset, right? So then you know, that's why that phase 2 is you're beginning phase 2 before you're done with phase 1 acquisitions. Once you're done getting enough rentals, you operate just in phase 2 only until it gets to a certain size. And you, like, to answer your question, why wouldn't you keep doing them? Well, managing multiple at that point becomes a little laborious. And there's also the truth of like, okay, if you're already worth 4, 5, 7 million, that's going to on leverage grow to 10, 12, 15 down the road. What's an extra $500,000 in equity going to do for you on leverage? You're already hit the number that you're planning on getting to. Does it mean you shouldn't do a value add deal? No, go ahead and do it. But this is this is when people have thought, should I flip or should I do a develop to sell or should I do a develop to rent? To me, it's crystal clear. You first build up a portfolio. And then if you're going to flip or do developments to sell, do that after you have the portfolio, because the portfolio is sheltering that tax too. And now you can start pumping more of that money into the market. You can be a little bit more liquid before that exchange event happens, right? And you know, and also, even though it's maybe not going to get this huge leverage returns, remember, you're starting to enter that realm of having your personal net worth market cap value is starting to grow big enough where, hey, 10% is pretty good. You're already worth 5. It's going to grow to 15. Maybe you can build another 4 or 5 in the stock market. And if you have 15 to 20 total net worth and you're hoping for a 10% return on that money, hey, it's $2 million, right? You're fine. You're starting to enter that world of like low double-digit returns is perfectly fine. Right. And you don't need to rely on the leverage so heavily because you're getting to that higher net worth, which is the whole reason why we can never talk Warren Buffett into investing in my strategy, because you can't scale it to that kind of market cap value, which is that becomes our own personal problem, which is a good problem. Don't get me wrong, but you're entering this world of why is the stock market so important? You know, to me, it's so crystal clear, and I never understood why people couldn't explain this. Now that I see it, it is to me as clear as day. Value add leverage real estate will help you build up your first 3 to 5 million, and on leverage growth will grow to 10 to 20, right? And that I don't see a way that other people can build up that kind of net worth as fast, as efficiently as doing that, especially with the tax shelters, leverage, and all that. But it's not going to be your pathway to 100 million. And almost never do you see someone in the Forbes 400 list there purely because of real estate, right? And so to me, it makes so much sense to use it as that tool for what it's best for, which is to build up your first 3 to 5, let it grow on leverage to 10 to 20, and then go ahead and start pumping more money into the market then, right? If we're talking just about a money strategy only, right? The other part of it is that when people have set themselves up with that kind of financial freedom for the future, it also allows them to do some of the things that we were talking about earlier to show, which is most people starve for a financial freedom when there's something about their job they don't want to do forever. And what could you do different? What could you retire from? Not retirement completely, but what could you retire from in what you do that would not make you feel like you're starving to get out of your job? For me, it was chasing the rate shoppers and 100 real estate agents who know less about real estate than I do, right? And so, which I think you're already doing a lot of that, right?
Yes.
And for my clients, a lot of them are in the tech field, and some of our medical professionals, they feel very much the same way. There's actually aspects of their job they enjoy, but there's golden leashes that are around their neck that are demanding they work a certain way that they don't want to do. And the freedom to remove some of those leashes might reduce their earned income, but it doesn't mean that they don't want to work. It's just they don't want to work that way into their 60s. My friend Leica, she's a real estate professional in her relationship, and her husband's a tech guy, worked at Google, I think. And now he's a founding partner of a tech company, and his salary is a fraction of what he used to get at Google, and he doesn't get the RSU income anymore, but he has massive ownership in the startup. And maybe it doesn't take off. And if it doesn't, they're fine. Their portfolio, when we talked about it, sounds very similar to mine in terms of like net worth and equity position, because he has the exact same kind of exit idea in his head. But there's a chance that company could just take off and be worth tens and tens of millions to him. And I'm fucking rooting for them because it's such a great story that it's like it's about being the most purest version of who he should have been in his field anyways, who never felt like he had the freedom to do so until he had that foundation behind him. And that's where so many people feel they can't get themselves out of that hamster wheel of the upper middle class where they're just getting killed in taxes. And so this plan is really built for that. So phase 1 is acquisitions. Phase 2 is really just holding it on leverage and taking to tax shelters. And then phase 3 is exiting it by moving into high cap rate multifamilies or DSTs for cash flow. And people ask like, well, how do you ever? People always just assume you should pay them off. I'm like, yeah, you pay them off when you sell them, right? Now, so should you build up just big enough to equal your cash flow number? You could. Another strategy you could do though is you could add a few extra. A few extra could do things, because I thought about this because I have a few extra, right? Based off my cash flow goals were 50 grand a month, and I project to have almost 3 times that number if I wait for it to double. So what do? Well, my goal was really 50 to 100, so I'm gonna keep the 100 side of it, right? Yeah. But the extra rentals that exceed that cash flow number will do a couple of things for me. One of them is, I don't want to just live in one place. It'd be cool to have a second home when the weather's real shit in Seattle. Maybe like a place in South Florida. So let's 1031 to like a cool house in South Florida will operate as an Airbnb because it's a income producing. It's still tax shelter, right? It'll be on low leverage. So, and that also resets that depreciation cycle of what I was trading out of. So I get some tax savings on that and I can use it for a couple months of the year. Then also was kind of like my extra credit part of it. If there's a couple of properties that you really like and you don't want to sell, and I'm saying, and just know that from what my accountant told me, if you cash out of a property and you later on do a 1031, you only have to count that cash out as part of the cash boot of that exchange if you are intending on doing a 1031. That's what the tax rule says. Now, people cash out of their rentals all the time and eventually do a 1031 and never pay taxes on that boot because they didn't intend to do a 1031. They just kind of fell into it, kind of like the way I said earlier, which was, I didn't know about DSTs and I just moved my money into it at the end when I was just tired. So if you had this portfolio slightly bigger than what you needed for your cash flow number, it would be wise to have an extra few that you could say, here's a couple that are not going to go through the exact same phase 2, phase 3 plan. Here's a couple I really like. Maybe I don't do a cost seg because I don't want to sell those ones. And then at the moment they have a lot of equity in them, I cash out a bunch of money. Because what Andrew's told me is that the problem with the DSTs is that if you sell them before the maturity date, you get a big principal hit. And so I have to recognize that that's something that I will likely run into. And so it'd be wise to to have a liquidity event down the road that I'm not going to get taxed on. Well, that's great. I have my 30 rentals. Which ones are the ones I'm most attached to that the idea of selling them would be very painful, right? Because I just would like to keep them. Yeah. Okay, well, those ones, when the time comes, I will cash out refinance. That's a non-taxable event. And I will follow that same cycle that the other investors do, which is I'm not going to sell them ever until Father Time convinces me to, but it wasn't part of the plan. Because then that could be a large liquidity event. I could pull that money to the side. It could be invested in the market. It could always be liquid, right? The cash flow on it's gone down, but it wasn't part of the 1031 family of rentals that I own. And so I'll just hold them. And then if I ever get to the point where I'm like, especially, it also answers my questions for what do I do with the ones that have a 30-year fixed mortgage? Because I'm like, God, the ones that have a 30-year fixed mortgage into twos, why would I want to sell them when they double in value? I got another 15 years of this 2.25% rate, right? So, I could always take like an equity loan on those ones that doesn't touch the first mortgage. Then it eats up some of the cash flow, gives me a capital event, still have my low rate mortgage on the first position, hold it. And if I ever get to that position where I'm that old grumpy person who doesn't want to manage rentals anymore, then I could sell those ones. And then those ones almost for sure, if I pulled money out, will just get moved to a DST, because if I do a similar like kind exchange that's leveraged, that means if I pulled money out, I'm going to have to buy something else on high leverage, and it's going to not cash flow very well. So those ones, if I get forced into a sale because I don't want to hold them anymore, for sure we'll just go into a DST. But that's fine because I already had a bunch of capital that came out, and I already had the other portfolio I traded afterwards. But the short version of it is this: you acquire, you do your BRFRR strategy for a 10, 20-year period. You are getting a little cash flow. You're getting massive tax shelters. This thing is growing on leverage. And then down the road, you can sell it and move it to a position where it equals shit tons of cash flow unmanaged. And then you can ride to the sunset. And it works.
Well, and since we're on the subject, the conversations that we've had, well, I guess going on 5-6 years now about this, is that the reason that I insist people do planning for some of this is that in phase 1, while you're in the accumulation phase, the circumstance really demands that you have a disproportionate amount of life insurance, and predominantly though disability insurance, because that phase 1 element is so heavily emphasizing income, right? In order to buy those assets, you have to have income,
right?
And you have to show income, and you have to keep that income coming while you're in the asset accumulation phase. So
yeah, this is not going to be interesting to the people who are like, I hate my job and I want to find a way to, in the FIRE community, the financial independence, retire early community, there's some people who use real estate to get out of their working positions way faster.
Yeah.
They might, and I could design a plan that fits that, right? You could do the exact same thing, sell more of the assets and retain, keep lower leverage, so there's a higher net of what you hold. Then the amount of assets you're holding that are growing, they're not doing it on leverage, so your net worth isn't growing as fast, but your cash flow position is a lot higher. And then after you season it for a year or two, you can always do another exchange to a high cap rate investment. Then you can, on your 8 to 12 grand a month of passive cash flow, go be an expat in Thailand, and your life is great. My plan that I'm sharing is really designed for the upper middle class, highly taxed W-2 or small business owner who is trying to figure out how to sustain that quality of life with lots of passive cash flow. And they don't mind doing their job for a handful more years. They're not trying to find a way to quit right now, but they definitely don't love the idea of doing it, into their 60s. And also, they don't like the idea of doing it into their 60s so they can get some watered down, reduced cash flow number that's a fraction of their former earned income. The idea, the natural feeling for most people who are planning retirement is you're going to ask me to, put 15 to 25% of my income away for my whole life while I'm working. So that way, when I'm deep into my 60s, I can have an income that's 50 to 70% what I used to make. And that's if I don't fuck it up. And that's not only scary, but really depressing, especially for the really high income earners, because, a lot of people don't, I know what it feels like to be in that position where most of the people look at you and say, oh, well, boo-hoo, you're already making good money and now you don't like the fact you have to work to your 60s like the rest of us. Yes, but you have to understand that a lot of these small business owners and people who have these positions that pay that are being asked and demanded of working more hours than the people who are making less. And so it's even more, and we're still just human. At the end of the day, we're still just humans. And who wants to say, oh yeah, because the cost of me making a higher income, I'm willing to work in the same timeline that other people are and live a shorter timeline of my life because that stress, that kind of a stress load on me all the way into my mid 60s is something that's for sure going to take years off my life, right? I've totally recognized that the way I was working the last 10 years is not something that if I sustained into my 60s would not have an impact onto my vitality for my livelihood. I know for a fact it would take years of my life. I probably have already lost some years of my life for working that way for some of my years, but hopefully still young enough that I could make that pivot and shift that it's minimal because I'm still in my 40s now.
Well, and what you're really speaking to now is a values decision, right? And
right.
So, we live in that space, that behavioral value space. Because why people do things is mission critical to what we do. But yeah, phase one almost demands planning, and risk. Look, if you got a $10 million net worth, maybe traditional disability insurance, right? These things, the importance of these things changes based on how the income is being derived. But when you're in that asset accumulation phase, kind of phase one, when you're buying those assets, it's really important to plan, measure the asset values. I mean, just for example, when you're in phase three, your credit score is way less important than it is when you're in phase one.
Yes.
Right? So the order of importance, I talk about this all the time when you're like baking a cake. This is like baking a cake. If you just put all the ingredients in a bowl and put it in the oven, an hour later, you don't get a cake.
Right.
Right? So
or a pizza.
What you do in what order and the order in which the emphasis you put on these things matters, right? Disability insurance when you're in phase one is infinitely more important because the entire plan is contingent on your ability to earn income and have a decent enough credit score so that you can qualify for the financing.
Yeah.
If you don't have disability insurance and you lose your job and your income goes to zero and you're in phase one, say on property number 2, you have a problem, like a really big problem. So,
and I'm not a financial advisor, but I can also picture that if you're planning on holding for, let's say, a 15-year period, and you know that a permanent life policy is going to be important for other three, to me, a permanent life policy starts to matter more at the end of this process to help cover estate taxes. But at the beginning of this process, you're probably going to want a really big term policy, to cover during that hold period. So that way, if something were to happen, it would just, it would
Yeah.
wipe out most of the debts, and someone could just write out most of that timeline for you.
That's exactly right. So from a planning perspective, you're going to want to pay really close attention to term insurance that is convertible to permanent insurance, say 10 years, 15 years, 20 years later, once you've accumulated this large net worth. So, and
you
there
need
are
to be more,
convertible terms.
yeah, because you need something that's going to be more affordable now.
You need something that, is from a cash flow perspective is
More
low
affordable,
now,
right?
And then once cash flow and net worth and those things have kind of resolved themselves in a decade or two, that you can convert that term to permanent without having to qualify medically.
This is a perfect product for this, because the people ask, well, does the IRS ever get the rest of the money? And this is where your expertise comes in, Chris, right? Right, when you pass away, there's a step up in basis. So all the capital gains we just talked about gets wiped out. That if there's all those DSTs, the estate can wait for those to mature so they don't take a principal hit, and then sell them. And there's not going to be this huge taxable event for them like they are for the parents or whoever created the. But what happens is, if you follow this plan, you're putting yourself right into the category of, hey, you need to start worrying about estate taxes, right? Which I believe starts a little over $10 million on a federal level, right?
No, if it's
12.
No, it's 13 and change right now, and if you're married, it's 27.
Right.
But it's going to go down.
In January,
It's gonna go
1st, 2026.
It's going to go down
back to 6,
And in Washington,
No, it'll be 7. It'll be 7 and change.
and then household will be what, 14.
If you're married,
But
if you're
the
married,
likelihood that these estate tax issues get addressed this year, they're likely to extend some of these.
It's
current
correct.
rates. They're likely
Yeah,
going to
when it comes
extend
to-
these rates.
This particular year, this particular conversation is tricky because there's a lot of stuff that's in flux. At a minimum,
and for people who
if
are
you're
about to
married,
execute,
you probably have about 15 million in room. If you if you live longer, that will continue to go up. It goes up it's indexed against inflation, so it tends to actually go up pretty significantly every year. But that's
nor here or there, because anyone who's about to follow this plan hopefully lives through enough administrations that they know that that's going to be a different number by the time they get there.
It's always different,
which means that they just have to plan. They're going to have to address it, which is a good problem to have. Let's just take a step back and remind ourselves: if you have to worry about what's projected to be a tax on over a $13 million per person estate, that means you did something right. But if you follow this plan, it is part of making sure you get into that category. Which then, if that happens, then you'd want to make sure you have your convertible term to convertible life policy in place.
Well, and to be clear,
because the life. Let me take a step back.
we're
'cause I
talking
didn't say
about Washington State here too. There is an estate tax.
There's
in
a state
Washington
tax
State.
here. There's I want to make sure I'm really clear about what I'm trying to say, because I didn't really close that thought. Life insurance, while you're at the beginning phase, is meant to that if you're relying on these assets to grow on leverage, and you are a dutiful, healthy, high income earning software engineer, doctor, whatever, mortgage banker, whoever you are, that if something were to happen to you before you were to finish your plan, how does your estate be able to manage it? So the beginning part of the life insurance will pay off the debts, right? Or pay off enough of them they could pay for themselves. They can live off some of the income and ride it through that period of time. The importance of life insurance at the end is not to do that, because the minute you've sold these assets and you've moved the money, let's say you've pulled out, let's say you're in my position, 30 rentals, and let's say 7 of them I did a cash out, somewhere along the way, and I've got $5 million in cash and in the market on top of whatever I put in there between here and there, and I've still got like another 20 something million I'm moving into a DST. That movement has happened, and I'm making $100,000 a month in that cash flow, right?
Yeah.
If I'm in that position, why do I care about life insurance? Because at that position, the government's looking to take their share when I die, not in capital gains, but because of estate. And so the life insurance is just one of the tools that makes sense to me that you would get just to cover the tax position.
This is what you really do, okay? If you're at $20 million, you're going to go and get like a family office. You're going to fractionalize that with a bunch of other $20 million owners, and they're going to take care of everything for you.
Right.
Don't try to learn this shit on your own. Just have somebody go and do it.
Right.
Real talk.
Right.
Because you have income tax, you're going to have estate tax, you're going to have all kinds of different issues that you want to deal with, and like get there and then farm that out to somebody.
Right. But you can at least
That would be
answer
my
you can at
suggestion.
least answer one initial part of that plan, which is if you got the life policy that Andrew's referring to, which is going to be a convertible life policy that is protecting your leverage position at the beginning and converts
Yeah.
the life policy at the end. You're going to want that policy.
The answer is that So you're kind of right, but if you're on that track, you should be thinking about that like way far ahead. Okay, so like those 3 properties that you want to keep forever, you probably, if you're really going to keep them forever, you may want to consider like just moving them into an irrevocable trust right now.
Right.
They're going to grow. You're not going to get a step up in basis, but you're going to avoid. You're talking about this happens all the time. You're talking about capital gains tax versus estate tax, significantly different.
Right.
One is way higher than the other one, right? So you have to sometimes factor those things into play.
What is the estate tax rate, by the way?
Like 47, 48%.
Yeah, so the feds, the highest feds is what, 36 and a half, 39,
No, it's in the
39 and a
40s.
half? Is it
Estate tax?
the federal estate, the highest federal estate
No,
tax?
it's not the highest. You just get there and you pay.
Well, and then Washington State's highest, it's laddered.
It's 20.
It's like it's 20. It's well, I thought it was
20.
19.
Everything over 9.2 is 20.
Right. So, but it starts at what, 2 million? Household
Starts at
2 million.
So this is how it goes. Everybody gets 2.193. Call
Yeah.
it 2.2 to make it easy. The first million is 10%. So 2.2 to 3.2 is 10%. The next million is 14%. Then it goes up 1% per million until
Right.
everything over 9.2 is taxed at 20%.
Right. So at 5 million, your rate, is what, 15%?
Yeah.
So how many people in this area are dealing with that? They've got a 401k, they've got some insurance through their employer, they've got equity in their home, and bang, they're at the 2.13 that you can, it's 10% or whatever, right?
Right.
Then it goes to 14 and then 15 and 16 and 17 per million.
Right. Which is crazy.
So okay, maybe you're not dealing with the feds yet, but you're definitely dealing with a multi-million dollar estate
However,
exposure in Washington.
Right.
if you're low, though, here's the thing, though. If you're low, when you die, you get a step up in basis. So you can
Yes.
pay, your effective rate is going to be under the capital gains rate.
Yes.
So it still might be okay.
Yeah.
Correct.
It's not necessarily something that you want to move out.
The short version of
point
it is
the point is to be in dialogue about it, either with an estate planning attorney.
And the real
or
point is that you were probably not
advisor.
on this track until you followed my plan. For the people who care about this plan, this becomes only like you did your old projections and you were going to pay some smaller amounts on the state level, probably not the federal level, and you maybe just to get some life insurance cover it. But that plan never sounded great to you, anyways. This show is really about like, what does this plan look like? And yeah, I think that the exit includes some of the estate planning part of it, but we're just trying to enter a different realm of expectations. And if we are having lots of conversations about what we're going to do with your 15 to 20 million total net worth at the end, we did something right.
Correct.
Let's just start with that. We did
Yeah,
something
it is
right.
That's
You
right.
were able to have a post-tax, non-retirement age investment that was converted to potentially an amazing cash flow position well before 59 and a half, one that could match or exceed your high income earning salary, right? And what you do with that kind of a freedom has a handful of things. We can keep talking about the money part of it. Maybe you should do the cash out piece, maybe put more money in market, maybe go do that startup. Maybe that turns into another 10, 20 million or whatever, right? But what I find most people actually will do when they get to that stage is what I've already begun to do with mine, which is say, okay, real successful retirement probably is not sitting around watching Law and Order all day. That's what my friend Josh says, right? Because that's what his dad does in his retirement. But there was probably things that in your work that you wanted to retire from. And so if you get to that, if your portfolio is built where you can get this, 3, 5, 600, 700,000 of passive cash flow from these investments on your worst case scenario, if they move to DSTs, then what do you do different now? What would you do differently to make your lifestyle different now? Is making the most important thing now. And so that's why I say like, hey, for me, it's if I can make 2/3 my earned income doing my job the way I'm doing it, and then supplement it with the extra money of like a develop to sell, wholesale a deal here and there, flip a house, because I still enjoy doing the work, but why hold the asset? I already got a bunch of assets I'm holding. The assets I'm holding shelter my income against my regular earned income. So now I'm quietly retiring from all the things in my work I didn't like to do. And the quality of life improvement happens now, not just 10 years from now. I think, what I do is I play a game with myself. I'm getting $100,000 a month before I ever step out of the door. what are the things I would do today for work that I would enjoy? What things would get me juiced to go to work and be active? And if something doesn't fit that, then I don't care how much money I can make doing it. If it doesn't feel like it's a no-brainer in that world, I'm taking that from my mentor Saul. It's the same real estate mentor that Datch has, right? Always reminded me to only take no-brainer decisions, right? And so now it's like, okay, I've always wanted to operate in that space, but being a mortgage banker supporting hundreds of real estate agents, you have hundreds of bosses, right? Every client, every realtor is a boss, and we still have some form of that relationship now, but it's just the dynamics different, right? So for me, it's like, okay, it has to be a no-brainer personally and professionally. It needs to be very profitable, but also something I very much enjoy and would feel like I'd want to do it even if I didn't need the money, right? And that's how I decide what things I let enter into my business world now. Yeah. It needs to be something that looks like it's going to have a great business ROI, but also something I'm going to enjoy. And I can't say I figured it all out, but I can definitely say I'm a lot happier, right, than I was before doing my work. And who knows, maybe 10, 12 years from now, I won't want to do that either. But that's, right now what I'm doing is exactly what I picture I'd want to be doing if I were getting that money. And that's how I kind of make the business decisions moving forward. So then to me, it's like, if you're already starting to do that to some extent, then I feel like you already are entering that world of a working retirement, because what's really changed? Nothing's really changed.
So I do have a question that's come up as a result of this, and it kind of relates to what we're going through with right now, but also
real quick.
Yeah.
40% is the federal estate tax rate. Over $1 million. So it does step up, but fast.
Right.
Sorry. All right.
So how much does economic cycle impact phase 1, phase 2, phase 3? So let's start with phase 1. Mm-hmm. If you were picking an ideal time to start phase 1 and accumulate assets in real estate, when do you want to do that do you want to do that in a recession? You want to do that in a real estate boom time?
Well,
you want to do it when rates are higher, when rates are lower? I mean, if you were picking an economic cycle, which one would you pick to start?
So let me start with this. The idea of being a real estate developer is that you are using a fraction of your cost to receive a market value, a higher market value. So professional developers who develop to sell only, in my opinion, are not investors. And people could argue that all they want, but the IRS agrees with me. So I'm going to take the position that I'm right when I say that statement, because for the IRS's position, we're agreeing in this method. It's a cost of goods business. So if you buy a property and then you pay to me, it's like, land is like the flour of our pizza we made this Saturday. So Chris and I made pizzas last weekend, right? It's like you have your ingredients, you put it all together. And if you make something that's worth more than that when you're done, you can sell it for a profit. And that's all developers are doing, right? And so what I'm basically saying is that, hey, we should use that tactic to acquire real estate at a discounted cost. So when you ask the question, when's the right cycle to do it? It has more it's a blend of the cycle mixed with the margin of your development. So a lot of people would argue that it makes a lot of sense to do it in the years previous, because we had low rates. Of course, that would have been beneficial, and lots of years of strong appreciation. But the reason why, even if we have lower appreciation rates moving forward than we have the previous year, and it's hard to get this up to cash flow, there's more opportunity to develop right now than there was before. If you can't tell, I do think pretty deeply about these things I say out loud on a broad stroke. It takes a long time before I formulate a very detailed plan and opinion. And even though I do think appreciation rates for the next couple of years will be less than they were the last 10, 15, I couldn't even make this a business and help people on a large scale if it wasn't for the housing bills that have just passed. Because what I was doing for my own portfolio was very, very niche. I was doing it in a handful of places where the development code is very favorable, where I could buy things where there's this land upside to it. My main competition were regular home buyers who just wanted a house, right? Which has its own blend of pluses and minuses, right? But the whole part is that you're getting something cheaper than what they realize what it is, right? It's like the Willy Wonka chocolates, right? Everyone's just buying a chocolate. One person might get the golden ticket, right? Like you don't even know. I'm only bidding on the golden ticket ones. They don't even know that what they're trying to buy has a development upside. They would have been just fine with 5 other houses that sold in the next 3 months that look kind of similar, but wouldn't have had a development upside to it. And so I couldn't, as a person entering the space, if you knew all the things I knew and could use it in the smallest, less opportunistic, options in the years previous, of course, you could combine those together and say, I'm going to get this great cycle of low rates, and I'm going to get this great years of appreciation, and have my cake and eat it too. But then there was a lot less opportunities to even buy those because the code wasn't there yet. So now with the code where it's at, there's actually enough for people to enter the space saying, I don't know how to do this, but this could be my strategy. And my answer is yes. And there's actually going to be enough opportunities that as long as you're diligent, you'll get the portfolio you're looking for. Because what we're really talking about is building up a portfolio of $5 to $10 million on the initial stage and letting it grow on leverage through developing. And that shouldn't, by definition, be an easy thing for someone who's new to this space, right?
So the legislative environment has changed to create the opportunity to do what
That's
you're
correct.
talking about.
That's correct.
Well, that's a big factor.
It is a huge factor.
It's a big factor.
Isn't the answer though like it's always the right time? Like
For the most part, yeah. If it's a good deal, it's a good deal.
Every good or bad economic time is going to just sort of displace what the advantages and disadvantages are in the market,
Yeah.
right? It's like
Yeah. In a low rate environment, you could operate on a slimmer margin deal, right? And you wouldn't want to operate that slim because you're going to get this tailwind of low rates.
and you have more competition, right? You have other things going on. When rates are high, you have
Less
people,
competition, whatever. But there's
The math still has the math.
yeah.
At the end of the day.
But the deal has tons of margin on it,
Right.
then it's like it's going to work itself out,
Yeah.
right? So like it's not favorable to buy and hold in Bremerton right now because their primary employer is the Navy and Doge is cutting expenses, and I still bought a property there.
Well,
right?
the answer is maybe it's not a good time because you can't future cast,
Right.
It's really always easy to look backwards,
Right.
and say what you could have or should have done,
Right.
but it's impossible to really know.
But the short version of this is that if you have someone if your deal has enough margin in it, the deals that have the best margins will work in all the cycles.
Correct. The answer really is if the math doesn't work, don't hope for future changes that
Yes.
make the math work. Just make the math work right now.
Make
and
sure
you're
there's
fine.
nice, healthy margins.
That's right.
Yeah.
If things change in the future, they will probably change in a way that the math still works.
Every deal I did between 2020 to 2023 that had the bigger margins, the ones I'm like, oh, that was such a knock it out of the park deal, would still work in today's environment. I just would not have been able to hold as many of them.
Right.
I'd have to turn more of them and keep some to stabilize it and so forth. But it would have worked great. They all would have worked fine,
Right.
which is perfectly fine.
Yep.
Even at a slightly higher price point, because of time, appreciation, and it still would have worked. I just would have to unload more of it to make it work, which is why I planned that 11031 exchange I was talking about because I thought we were going to have to do it that way, but I was able to stabilize it without it, so I got lucky. But usually, the deal I most recently bought, it was like a $2.4 million acquisition, condo converted it, did a little bit of reno on it, and the combination of the rental plus a condo conversion boosted the value all the way to 4.25. So math said that, hey, that value is great, but that 4.25 is not based off of a cash flow. It's based off of individually selling the units.
Right.
So it doesn't cash flow to service $2.4 million in debt. So I'm going to have to unload part of it or pay it down. And so my plan was to pay it down by selling something else I had into it, which is also part of it. When I say BRFRR, sell some, keep some, but technically even in your growth stage, if you just kept on selling some of that individual development, you're going to get stuck owning units in 8 to 10 developments, and that could be kind of a pain in the ass. It'd be nice to just own all of one and sell all of that one later on. So you can also do some exchanges in the middle, like, oh, I'm going to sell this one, move that permanent capital to a project, then boost its value by developing it. And because I moved $200,000-300,000 of permanent capital from one sale on an exchange into it, I could just hold on to all of them and not have to deal with being in 10 HOAs. Again, this is part of like the estate planning thing. These are good problems to have because your portfolio is getting bigger. And so we're just trying to get a little bit more efficient with how we operate it.
Yeah.
But technically, you could still just operate that same way of sell some, keep some of that project, rinse and repeat. It just creates that management logistics issues a little sooner when it happens, which is only a problem when you have a lot of them.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's it. And that's the plan. And as many people as I didn't think a lot of people would be interested in it because there are so many pieces to it. I thought it was too complicated that people would be interested, but there's quietly a lot of people who are in the same category as me, 300 to 700 grand of taxable W-2 income a year. They've done the projections. They're good with math. And they all feel like, doing this into my 60s sounds like shit. And I want a different plan. And, for anyone who's smart enough to see the different angles of it, really the financial planning side should endorse and promote people doing this because it does answer a lot of the questions of how to try to build that initial wealth. And like I said, and even on a commission basis, there's still a lot of commissions to be made on those DST trades and insurance purchases done at the beginning, right? But but you know how it is. I understand why people don't have this in their plan and why people don't even know about things like DSTs to the end, because people are always chasing the right now money. They do it in my industry, they do it in Andrew's industry, they do it in your industry too, Chris, right? And people just do it because they need right now money, so they're just trying to sell. And in that process of doing so, it creates these problems. And one of the problems is that people think that you have to pay off your rentals to get cash flow, even in a high value, low cap rate market. And that's just flat out not true. All that effort that was spent paying those off could have just been adding more.
Right. That
grew on leverage. And then when you got to that same stage of I'm done, you just traded in way more, and then they all got paid off, and it would have equaled a bigger number, and you could have done the trade out sooner, right? Than it took to pay off all that stuff. And so, to me, it just makes way more sense than it does to do it the other way. So,
yep. Well, and to comment on some of that, the way that we've managed some of the market is, we only do 721s or DST. We only do exchanges for clients.
Right.
So, we avoid that call in the 11th hour, the Hail Mary, trying to fix, trying to save an exchange, because, 2 of their 3 fell through and they're trying to identify a third and they've got a day to do it. And
right.
So, we're only doing that work for financial planning clients. So we know well in advance, right? And then, of course, right now, because they're getting more popular, in order to do one, you have to get an allocation. You have to get a seat at the table, and you have to have a reserve, and you have to be able to get an allocation. So, because it's not just as easy. Like, there have to be offerings available that you can roll into.
Yeah.
Which is pretty good. The firm is pretty good at having a consistent pipeline of them. But again, we're not marketing it to the public, right? As a service, as a one-off service, we're only doing that work for clients. Financial planning clients that we're helping with risk and protection needs, or and their asset management needs. So, it's definitely not something that we lead with, but it's definitely something that we help existing clients with.
Yeah. In terms of like the capital event you talked about, I think I've kind of answered it in 2 different ways. There's some properties I have really low fixed rate mortgage. I can always take equity positions on second liens and cash out later on. And then I'm the weird one who's actually done a qualified opportunity fund. So it's growing tax free. So that one, when I'm finally done with that one, I can just sell off that one. Not have to worry about. There's some tax I have to pay, the 85% of the deferral, but 15% of that will get exempt, and all the gains on it will be exempt too. So there's different ways to do that. But I do not recommend on a large scale people try to operate their own qualified opportunity fund. If you really geek out over the shit like I do, I can model out all the different markets in the Pacific Northwest where you can actually operate that plan and it works. But it's a lot of work. It's really hard, and I just don't think it's probably necessary for the average investor. I think that just get a couple more, do the cash out thing like I talked about, and then if you need to do a DST exchange on it later on when you're tired of managing it, that's the way you can get some of your capital.
Well, since we're on the subject and we're talking about geeking out on things, this strategy is a culmination of 25 years of work on your part.
Yeah.
Right. You've been working to find competitive edge in your space for the entire time I've known you, which is almost 2.5 decades at this point. And
the wheels aren't going to stop. That's just not who I am.
No, but it's also,
it will look different even 5 years from now.
It's also for someone that's looking at starting a strategy like this. I've seen the building blocks of this. Every 2 years, the new building block gets put in.
Correct. It's why I'm not doing it.
And I've seen the culmination of this knowledge over 25 years. And you and I have been having, monthly meetings or quarterly meetings talking about every phase of this in its evolution for 20 plus years. And now, because of a legislative market, it doesn't require your domain expertise for someone to do these things.
Yeah, I can look. The way I look at it is like, it's kind of, I would reference back to making pizzas, right? Someone else has figured out the recipe. Am I going to give myself enough bandwidth to operate the playbook, right? And is there enough opportunities that it can be done at scale? And for the first time, I could say yes. People have asked, should I write a book on it? I'm like, no, because I can't even say that there's going to be enough, even though the plan as a whole could still make sense. you know, it only feels like our you know, there's probably always going to be some versions of BRRRR investments that exist out there. So yes, technically the whole plan, you know, kind of laid out could be exercised. But specifically in Washington, we have a very unique opportunity to operate on the first part of that plan, which is, can other people really buy these development deals with at retail price of just a house? And the answer is yes, but it's never been at the scale that I've seen as what exists now. The opportunities to develop are so broad, which I think will also is one of the reasons why I don't expect huge amounts of annual year-over-year appreciation, even in a good market, because it will help bring more. You know, the whole purpose of it was to provide more housing to help keep it more affordable. And so if it keeps it from surging 8-10% a year.
And you're seeing that because of inventory.
I think it's a combination of both. It's a combination of both. You know, extra inventory coming into market plus higher interest rates. But there's so much of a need for housing that it all the housing units that can come from doing this are not going to solve the problem of our lack of housing in our area. It just reduces it. And it's going to do its job and reduce it. And that means that your year-over-year appreciation will be slower. But you get a nice, healthy 30-40% boost in tax shelters in the meantime. If it only grows 50% and you trade out of it, for, you know, add a few more, you know, and the plan still works, especially if you enjoy it. That's the other part of it, just especially if you enjoy doing that work.
Yeah. Okay, let's wrap it up.
Yeah.
Been going for a while. That was good, though. Good talk, Keane out here. Just Professor Keane just teaching us all about the real estate world. Okay. All right. That is it for today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Rewind it and listen to it again. Tons of good stuff. As always, I am Chris.
I'm Keane.
I am Andrew.
This is the Business Barbershop Podcast. See ya.
See you guys later.